begin. It was a Monday evening when my life unraveled. I had come home earlier than usual, hoping to surprise Ellie with takeout from her favorite Thai place. The smell of freshly made green curry wafted through the car, mingling with the cool evening air as I pulled into the driveway. The house was dark except for the faint glow from the living room window. Nothing unusual. Ellie often kept the lights low when she was home alone. But tonight felt different. I stepped inside quietly, my shoes making soft clicks against the hardwood floor. The aroma of curry mixed with something else, a faint whiff of perfume that wasn't hers. My stomach churned. My instinct screamed at me to turn around, to walk away, but I couldn't. Not yet. As I moved toward the living room, I heard the faint murmur of her voice. Ellie was laughing, soft, melodic, and carefree, a sound I hadn't heard in months. My heart thudded in my chest as I realized she wasn't alone. "Brian, stop," she said, her tone playful yet intimate. "You'll get me in trouble." I froze, gripping the edge of the wall for support. Brian. The name struck me like a physical blow, the weight of it pinning me in place. My pulse quickened, a rush of blood roaring in my ears as I leaned closer to catch her words. "No, he's not home," Ellie continued, her voice dropping to a conspiratorial whisper. "It's fine. Just don't say that. You're terrible." I felt the blood drain from my face. Every syllable she uttered confirmed what I feared most. She didn't know I was there. She didn't know I had come back early. And she certainly didn't know that I could hear every word. The room spun around me as my mind raced to make sense of what I was hearing. Ellie, my wife of 11 years, was talking to another man, laughing, flirting, acting as though the life we'd built together was nothing more than a convenient backdrop to her betrayal. The sound of her laughter cut through me like a knife. It wasn't just the infidelity. It was the ease with which she lied, the comfort she found in someone else's attention. My hands trembled as I fought the urge to storm into the room and demand answers. But I knew I couldn't do that. Not yet. I needed proof. Quietly, I stepped back into the hallway, my mind already working through the possibilities. Confronting her now would only give her a chance to deny it, to twist the narrative into something I couldn't control. No, I had to play this carefully. If she was willing to betray me, then she needed to feel the weight of her choices. And I was going to make sure of that. I sat at the kitchen table, staring blankly at the untouched takeout container in front of me. Ellie walked in moments later, her phone tucked into her back pocket, a faint smile lingering on her lips. When she saw me, her expression shifted, just slightly, but enough for me to notice. It was subtle, like someone caught mid-thought, unsure if they'd been overheard. "You're home early," she said, her tone light, but there was something cautious in the way she approached me. "Yeah," I replied, keeping my voice steady. "Thought we could have dinner together. I brought your favorite." She glanced at the bag on the counter, her smile returning, but it didn't quite reach her eyes. "That's sweet. Thank you." She walked over to the counter, unpacking the containers with a practiced ease that made my chest tighten. How could she stand there, so calm, after what I had just heard? The thought made my jaw clench, but I forced myself to stay composed. This wasn't the time for an outburst. Not yet. As she sat down across from me, the silence between us grew heavy. Ellie poked at her food, her gaze flickering to mine every few moments. I could see the tension in her shoulders, the way her fingers gripped the fork just a little too tightly. She was waiting for me to speak, to say something, anything that would break the quiet. But I wouldn't give her that. Finally, she sighed, setting her fork down. "You've been quiet lately. Is everything okay?" I laughed, a short, humorless sound that made her flinch. "You tell me, Ellie, is everything okay?" Her brow furrowed, and for a moment, she looked genuinely confused. "What's that supposed to mean?" I leaned forward, my eyes locking onto hers. "It means I want to know if there's anything you'd like to tell me. Anything you've been keeping to yourself." She froze, her fork halfway to her mouth, her expression shifting from confusion to something closer to panic. "I don't know what you're talking about." "Don't you?" I said, my voice sharper now. "I think you do, Ellie. I think you've been doing a lot of talking lately. To someone who isn't me." The color drained from her face, and she set the fork down with a clatter. "You've been spying on me? Don't turn this around on me." I snapped, my composure finally slipping. I heard you, Ellie. On the phone. Laughing, flirting. With him. She looked away, her hands trembling slightly as she clasped them together on the table. It's not what you think. Then tell me what it is, I said, my voice cold. Explain to me how my wife, can be sneaking around behind my back and still have the audacity to sit here like nothing's wrong. For a moment, I thought she might deny it. But then her shoulders slumped and she looked down at her hands. I didn't mean for it to happen, she said quietly. It just did. My stomach twisted. How long? Her voice was barely above a whisper. A few weeks. 11 years of marriage, and she had thrown it all away in a matter of weeks. The realization hit me like a punch to the gut, and I had to grip the edge of the table to steady myself. Why, Ellie? I asked, my voice breaking despite my best efforts. Why would you do this to us? She finally met my gaze, her eyes filled with a mixture of guilt and defiance. It's not about you. It's about me. I've been feeling trapped, like I'm losing myself. And Brian, he makes me feel alive again. Alive? I repeated, the word bitter on my tongue. You think betraying me makes you feel alive? She flinched at the venom in my voice, but didn't look away. I didn't want to hurt you. I still love you. Don't, I said sharply, cutting her off. Don't you dare say that to me. The room fell into a suffocating silence, the weight of her confession hanging heavy in the air. I pushed back from the table, unable to look at her anymore. My hands were shaking, my chest tight with a mix of anger and heartbreak. I need some air, I said, grabbing my keys from the counter. We're not done talking about this. Without waiting for a response, I walked out the door, the cool evening air hitting me like a slap to the face. I needed to clear my head to figure out what I was going to do next. Because one thing was certain, this wasn't over. The streets were quiet as I drove aimlessly, my mind a whirlwind of emotions. Anger, disbelief, humiliation, they all swirled together, each one fighting for dominance. Ellie's words echoed in my head, a cruel mantra I couldn't shake. He makes me feel alive again. I tightened my grip on the steering wheel, my knuckles turning white. 11 years of marriage, and this was how she repaid me? By seeking out some thrill with another man, as if our life together wasn't enough. By the time I pulled into the empty lot of a nearby park, I had made up my mind. I couldn't confront her again. Not yet. Confrontation without proof would only give her room to twist the narrative. No, I needed to know everything. I needed to see the full picture. And I knew exactly who to call. Derek picked up on the second ring. Hey, it's been a while, he said, his voice warm but cautious. What's going on? I hesitated for a moment, the weight of what I was about to say hitting me all over again. I need your help, Derek. It's about Ellie. There was a pause on the other end. What kind of help? The kind where you find out everything, I said, my voice flat. Who she's been seeing, where she's been going, what they've been doing. I need the truth. Derek sighed, his tone shifting to something more professional. Okay, I can do that. But are you sure this is the route you want to take? Once you go down this road, there's no turning back. There's nothing to turn back to, I said bitterly. Just tell me what you need. The next morning, I met Derek at a coffee shop on the other side of town. He looked just as I remembered, sharp-eyed and calm, with a quiet intensity that made him perfect for his line of work. You brought what I asked for? He said, nodding toward the small envelope I held. Everything I know so far, I replied, sliding it across the table. Inside were notes I had hastily scribbled the night before. The name Brian, details about Ellie's schedule, and any little clues I could remember from the past few weeks. Derek flipped through the pages, his expression unreadable. This is a good start, he said. I'll need a few days to dig deeper. But from the sound of it, this guy is someone she works with. That's what she said, I replied, my voice tight. Apparently, he's new at her office. Derek nodded, tucking the envelope into his bag. I'll start there. In the meantime, try to keep things normal at home. Don't let on that you're suspicious. I scoffed. Easier said than done. Just trust me, he said, his tone firm. The more she thinks she's in control, the more careless she'll get. That's when we'll catch her. The next few days were some of the longest of my life. I forced myself to act as though nothing was wrong, smiling through gritted teeth as Ellie went about her day. She was quieter than usual, her guilt written all over her face, but she didn't try to bring up our conversation from the other night. It was as if we had reached some unspoken agreement to avoid the subject altogether. But I couldn't avoid it. Not really. Every time I saw her smile or heard her phone buzz with a new message, my chest tightened. Was it him? Was she thinking about him while sitting across from me at the dinner table? The waiting was torture, but I knew it was necessary. Derek had assured me he was making progress, and I clung to that hope like a lifeline. By Monday evening, Derek called with his first update. "I've got a name," he said. "Brian Carter. He's a junior manager at our office. Joined about 2 months ago." I clenched my fist, the name solidifying the shadowy figure in my mind. "What else?" "They've been spending a lot of time together after work," Derek continued. "Coffee shops, lunch breaks, and more private locations. I've tracked them to his apartment twice already." The words hit me like a blow, each one chipping away at the last vestiges of denial I'd been clinging to. "Do you have proof?" "Photos, timestamps, you name it," Derek replied. "I'll send you everything." I took a shaky breath, forcing myself to stay calm. "What's the next step?" "I'm going to keep tracking them," he said. "From what I've overheard, they're planning a trip out of town this weekend. If you want to catch them in the act, that'll be your best shot." The thought of Ellie packing her bags to spend a weekend with him made my blood boil. But it also gave me clarity. This wasn't just a fleeting mistake. This was a full-blown affair. And if she thought she could walk away from it unscathed, she was sorely mistaken. This wasn't over. Not by a long shot. By Friday morning, the pieces were in place. Derek's updates over the past few days had been thorough, leaving no doubt about what was happening. Ellie and Brian had booked a weekend stay at the Havenwood Cliffs Resort, a picturesque getaway just far enough from town to feel like an escape. It was the same place Ellie and I had celebrated our first anniversary, a detail that made my stomach churn every time I thought about it. I wasn't just angry anymore. I was resolute. If Ellie wanted to see what life was like without me, I was going to make sure she truly understood the consequences of her actions. That morning, Ellie packed her things while I pretended to be engrossed in a work call. I stood in the hallway, phone pressed to my ear, watching her from the corner of my eye. She moved quickly, almost nervously, as if she expected me to question her plans. But I didn't. Instead, I waited for her to come to me. "I'm heading out for the weekend," she said casually, standing at the door with her suitcase. "It's a work thing. Team-building retreat." The audacity of her lie was almost laughable. I forced a neutral expression and nodded. "Okay, have a good trip." Her lips curved into a faint smile, but her eyes didn't meet mine. "Thanks. I'll call if I can." With that, she was gone, leaving the faint scent of her perfume lingering in the air. I watched through the window as she climbed into Brian's car. He greeted her with a quick kiss before loading her suitcase into the trunk. My jaw tightened, but I stayed rooted in place, watching as they drove away. Once they were out of sight, I grabbed my own bag, already packed with everything I needed, and headed out the door. Derek was waiting for me a few blocks away, his car idling at the curb. "Everything set?" he asked as I climbed into the passenger seat. "Yeah," I replied, my voice steady. "Let's do this." Derek nodded and pulled into traffic, his demeanor as calm and focused as ever. "We'll give them a bit of a head start, just to be safe. The cameras are already set up at the resort, so all we need to do is get into position." "Good," I said, staring out the window as the city blurred past. My mind raced with a mix of anticipation and dread. I had no idea how Ellie would react when everything came crashing down, but I wasn't doing this for her. I was doing this for me, for the man she had betrayed and discarded as if I were nothing. By the time we arrived at Havenwood, the sun was beginning to set, casting a golden glow over the resort's picturesque grounds. Derek parked a safe distance away, and we made our way to the room next to Ellie and Brian's. The adjoining walls and discreet surveillance equipment would give us everything we needed. Derek unpacked the gear quickly, his movements efficient and precise. "I'll monitor the live feeds," he said, gesturing to the small array of cameras and recording devices. "If anything changes, I'll let you know." I nodded, my stomach churning with a mix of anger and anticipation. Thanks, Derek, for everything. He gave me a small smile. Just make sure you're ready for whatever happens next. As night fell, I sat in the dimly lit room, watching the live feed from the hidden cameras. Ellie and Brian had settled into their suite, laughing and chatting like a couple without a care in the world. My blood boiled as I watched Brian pour her a glass of wine, his hand lingering on hers just a little too long. Ellie smiled at him, a smile that used to be mine, and leaned closer, her voice soft and teasing. I clenched my fists, forcing myself to stay calm. The time for confrontation wasn't now. Not yet. The night dragged on, each moment feeling like an eternity. Ellie and Brian moved to the balcony, their laughter carrying faintly through the walls. Derek's voice crackled through the earpiece he'd given me. "They're getting comfortable," he said. "You ready for the next step?" "More than ready," I replied. The next step was simple. Let Ellie see what it felt like to have her perfect little fantasy shattered. As they lounged on the balcony, completely unaware of the hidden cameras capturing every moment, Derek sent a message to Brian's phone. It was a carefully crafted text, designed to sow seeds of doubt and chaos. "You think she's only cheating on her husband with you? Don't be so naive." Brian's reaction was immediate. He stiffened, his gaze snapping to Ellie. "What the hell is this?" he demanded, holding up his phone. Ellie's expression faltered, confusion and panic flashing across her face. What's wrong?" Brian didn't answer. Instead, he shoved the phone into her hands, his jaw tight. As she read the message, her face went pale. "Who sent this?" she asked, her voice trembling. "You tell me," Brian snapped. "Is there someone else? Or is this just your husband messing with us?" The tension between them was palpable, and I watched with grim satisfaction as Ellie struggled to regain control of the situation. This was just the beginning. By the time the weekend was over, there would be no turning back for either of them. Ellie's face was a mask of shock and fear as she held Brian's phone, the damning text message glaring back at her. "This is ridiculous," she said, her voice unsteady. "It's probably nothing. Someone trying to mess with us." Brian wasn't convinced. His face darkened, and he took a step back from her. "Nothing? Really? Because from where I'm standing, it looks like someone knows exactly what you've been doing." "Brian, come on," Ellie said, forcing a nervous laugh. "You're not seriously buying this, are you?" "I don't know, Ellie," he snapped. "Should I? Because now I'm wondering if I'm not the only one you've been sneaking around with." Her eyes widened, and she reached for his arm. "That's not true." "You know it's not." Brian pulled away, pacing across the room, the tension thickening with every passing second. I watched the scene unfold on the live feed, my heart pounding. This was the first crack in Ellie's facade, and it was exactly what I needed. In the adjoining room, Derek glanced at me. "You want me to send another one?" I nodded, my jaw tight. "Let's turn up the heat." Derek typed out the next message, this time targeting Ellie. Moments later, her phone buzzed on the coffee table. She hesitated, glancing at Brian before picking it up. Her face paled as she read the message. "Did you tell Brian about the other night? Or are you keeping that a secret too?" She froze, her hands trembling. This isn't possible," she muttered. Brian was on her in an instant. "What does it say?" "Nothing," she said quickly, locking the screen. "It's just spam." "Spam?" he repeated, his voice rising. "Let me see." "No," she said, clutching the phone to her chest. "It's private." Brian's eyes narrowed. "Private? What else are you hiding, Ellie? Who else are you hiding?" I leaned back in my chair, a grim satisfaction settling over me. Ellie was losing control, her carefully constructed web of lies unraveling with every word. This was the moment I had been waiting for, the moment when she would finally understand the cost of her betrayal. But this was only the beginning. The next morning, I arrived at the resort just as the sun was rising. Derek had stayed behind to monitor the feeds, ensuring I had a clear picture of what was happening. Ellie and Brian hadn't left their room all night, their argument carrying on well into the early hours. I stood outside their door, my heart pounding. This was it, the moment of reckoning. I raised my hand and knocked sharply, the sound echoing down the quiet hallway. There was a pause, then the sound of footsteps. The door opened, and Ellie stood there, her expression shifting from confusion to shock the moment she saw me. "John," she stammered, her voice barely above a whisper. What? What are you doing here?" I pushed past her into the room, my gaze locking on Brian, who was standing by the bed, his face a mix of guilt and anger. "I think it's time we all had a little chat," I said coldly. Ellie closed the door behind me, her voice trembling. "John, please, let me explain." "Explain?" I interrupted, turning to face her. "Explain what? That you've been sneaking around with him? That you've been lying to me for weeks? Go ahead, Ellie. Explain." She opened her mouth, but no words came out. Brian stepped forward, his voice defensive. "Look, man, this isn't what it looks like." I cut him off with a sharp laugh. "Oh, it's exactly what it looks like. You think I didn't know? You think I haven't been watching this whole time?" Their silence was answer enough. I pulled out my phone, opening the gallery filled with photos and videos Derek had compiled. I tossed it onto the bed, the screen lighting up with an image of Ellie and Brian leaving his apartment. "Take a good look," I said, my voice low and dangerous. "This is what you've both been doing behind my back." Ellie's face crumpled, tears streaming down her cheeks. "John, I'm sorry." "I don't," I snapped, my voice sharp. "You don't get to apologize. Not now." I turned to Brian, my glare icy. "And you? Did you think this would end well for you? Did you think I'd just let you waltz into my life and take what's mine?" He opened his mouth to respond, but I held up a hand, silencing him. "You're both going to regret this. Every single choice you've made will come back to haunt you. I promise you that." By the time I left the resort, Ellie and Brian's relationship was in shambles. The messages, the photos, the confrontations, it had all been too much for them to handle. Derek and I had ensured that every detail of their affair was documented and ready to use in court. Ellie would lose everything: the house, the stability of our life together, and the respect of everyone who once admired her. And Brian? He would carry the stain of this affair for the rest of his life, his reputation in ruins. As I drove away from Havenwood, a strange sense of calm settled over me. This wasn't the ending I had wanted for our marriage, but it was the one Ellie had chosen. And now, she would have to live with the consequences.